Well, after 17 months of being with you, mostly entirely on Zoom during these extraordinarily challenging times, I have way more reflections than can be contained in this short time. So my sharing is incomplete. But I hope to focus on a couple of key pieces for your reflection as we move forward. But first, a brief story. On Friday night, 9 of us gathered around the labyrinth in the sanctuary to share what's really going on with us. It was called Time to Feel and Get Real. There was truth spoken. There were tears shed. It was the simple act of community being community. And we all felt the power of it. More than one person shared how it is community that keeps them alive. So when we're talking today and in the coming weeks and months about this community, we're not talking about just a cool church or just an innovative nonprofit. We're talking about life and death right now. And as climate change, among other things, continues to impact us, the need for community will absolutely become more acute, not less. Now, you personally may not be feeling that depth of need for community, this one in particular. We all go through seasons where we are more and less connected to community. But many do feel that depth about this community in particular. And so questions for everyone to reflect on are, what does this community mean to you? To your family? What if it didn't exist? What difference would it make to you? So for 17 months, I have journeyed with you, first briefly with a transition discernment team. Then we tried unsuccessfully to move forward with a transition listening team. Then came an almost brand new CMLT and board. Then we added a teeny ad hoc space every other week for wiped out parents to come together. Ultimately, my journey with you continued with no transition team at all. And most leaders and parents doing their best just to show up for the meetings in one piece. It's been a rough time. It's been a rough time for this community. And kudos to every one of the leaders who has stretched their capacity to even show up and try to imagine a way forward. But all this time, as twisting and turning as this journey has been, I've been listening. LaVeta and I have been reflecting. We've gotten some important stories shared. Thanks to another ad hoc, small but mighty team, we did some staffing scenario groundwork last June. And in that little ad hoc parent cohort, Cheryl got a fire in her belly and a vision, and soon Jane was among us and the garden geeks. And now the parents are coming together to invite the whole Salt and Light community to read a book together starting in Advent. That's exciting. But truth be told, in mid to late summer, I kind of hit a wall. I had no idea how to accompany you. I had no idea how to even gather the community much less work through issues and discern what those issues are, or process how the last 18 months have changed this community, or develop some sort of relational process to gather input so that the paperwork that any future leader reads about you honestly reflects who you are. And did I mention I'm supposed to be half-time? Well, some good old vacation time did wonders, as did that profound experience walking on the sand labyrinth in Bandon that I shared about in September. As did reading, underlying, and dog-earing this book about the formation of this community. How many communities have actual books written about them? Fair warning. In the new year, I'm going to recommend that the CMLT and the board, and maybe everyone, read this book together. Understanding the history of community matters. But reading that book helped me in at least two ways. That brings us here to today. First, it helped me clarify some things that I needed if I were to continue leading the community through this transition process. I needed a team that was bigger than just LaVeta and myself to try to see and reflect on the big picture of the community. I needed focus and accountability. I needed boundaries around time and areas of responsibility. And in addition, I needed other teams who were clear about their roles, responsibility, and authority. Because I kept having this feeling like I, or LaVeta and I, were bearing the weight of this whole community with almost no accountability to anyone. And I wondered why that was so. There are deeper questions in there to explore, no doubt. But for now, I'll just say that some of these pieces are coming into place and some are still in process, and I can live with that. I'm now meeting weekly with LaVeta, Allie, Nancy, Jane, Jules Nielsen, and Elena when she's available, as an kind of an ad hoc big picture strategy team. The second way the book helped me is that it helped me find a way to frame what I've been hearing and seeing and sensing in the community. What I came up with, I have shared with the CMLT and the board, and with this weekly team I'm meeting with. It's not the whole picture, but it's a picture. Or rather, it's more like a picture frame. And the community, you, get to choose how to paint the picture itself. So I'm going to show you the picture of this grand, finely crafted frame of sticky notes on butcher paper, just so you can see a visual image. Don't try to read the specific words themselves. It's the image I want you to see, and I'll talk you through the sticky notes. So I'm going to share my screen. I can't see you, so I'm going to trust that you can see that picture, unless I hear otherwise.
And for those of you, some of you may have somewhere on your screen in the menu, it says view options. If you go to view options, you can make this picture bigger if you need to make it bigger. Just letting you know.
Thanks, LaVeta. And again, it's not the specifics. I'm going to talk through the specifics, but it's just to get the picture of this frame with a blank canvas in the middle. So on the left-hand side, I simply identified first what I have heard and seen and come to understand as the gaps, meaning the areas where insufficient energy and attention is going into making these areas strong and robust, hence a sense of a gap in the community. On the left are also named areas where there is emerging energy or interest. Some even just flickers of a fire. Some are being kindled and blown on a little bit. But those are also where emerging energy is showing up. On the right-hand side, you'll see goals as they relate to the energy gaps and the emerging energy. The colors imperfectly correlate to these areas. The hot pink at the top correlates to the Leaven community. The orange sticky note correlates to salt and light. And that's why it's imperfect, because salt and light is part of Leaven. So just understand the imperfection of that. Blue is the parent, youth, children cohort, which is of course also part of salt and light and Leaven. And then the neon green, yellowish sticky note is around kind of the organizational infrastructure. And on the bottom, you'll see a category called lenses, tools, practices, values. This is not an exhaustive list, but it's a partial list of the practices, the perspectives, the values that this community has already named for itself in previous statements, in its purpose, vision, mission, values, and diversity, equity, inclusion statements. And also other values that leaders thus far have affirmed as being beneficial to the community. Some of these practices have gone dormant. But if the community wants to move from gaps to goals, or if it wants to nurture the emerging energy, then the teams who come together to work in these areas will want to dig out these tools, rediscover them or learn them, lean into the values that you've already claimed in order to make the way forward. So on the left, where energy is emerging is in these three areas. First, the children, youth, garden, parent cohort. That energy, just so you know, is going to emerge into a big old budget line item pretty soon, which is very exciting, but we'll talk more about that later. Another area where energy is emerging is around spiritual formation for all ages. This is also primarily, but not exclusively, emerging within and from that parent cohort. And finally, there's energy emerging around creating and recreating a uniquely Leaven story sharing space that draws on the wisdom and experiences and practices of this community and is co-created by the current Leaven community. So those on the left are the areas where energy is emerging. There may be others. Also on the left, the energy gaps that have appeared are in two primary areas. The first is around that neon sticky note around organizational infrastructure. This is not a new issue for this community, I understand. There are gaps in basic organizational functioning, like administration, like communications, like technology. There's a gap right now in pastoral leadership and no team to even move toward finding that leadership. There are gaps in clarity, in terms of the roles and responsibilities of the board and the CMLT and how they work together. There's a gap in sufficient time, energy, and focus dedicated to nurturing stewardship and investment in this community, which leads to a gap in funding to support the basic work of the community. And again, we'll get to talk about that in a couple of weeks when we talk about the budget. All these gaps compromise the strength and sustainability of the community. The other area where gaps have been named is around Leaven itself. What is Leaven? And how do the Leaven identity and practices and relationships and leaders, how do they get nurtured? How do leaders get developed? What are the spaces where that nurturing happens? Who nurtures the relational organizing culture of the Leaven community? What teams? What are the entry points into Leaven? How do Leaven members learn about organizing practices and culture? How do Salt and Light members know they're participants in Leaven aside from a statement on paper? Those are some pretty big gaps. And the pandemic has certainly widened those gaps. It's been a rough year, remember? But it didn't create them. They were already there. So if I may, I'd like to offer a word of perspective here. There's not a single person within this community who wants those gaps to be there. Whoever wanted those gaps within Leaven to appear. The people within this community who were around to imagine and create this thing called Leaven gave hundreds, thousands of hours to give birth to a new thing. To create a nonprofit grounded in spirituality and community organizing with the express purpose of having a container, a way to bring people of Christian faith and others of goodwill together on a level playing field. To listen deeply to one another's pain and pressures, and to develop the relational power to mitigate that pain by addressing the public causes of it. That is an incredible vision, and it is also holy insanity to create such a thing. And to do it within a culture that is hell-bent on destroying every attempt at genuine, diverse, beloved community acting with power together. The fact that there are big gaps in who and what Leaven is both heartbreaking because of the heart that went into its creation and that is still beating today. And at the same time, it isn't surprising at all. The external and internal pressures working against Leaven's very existence are intense. And you're all only human, after all. So what does a thriving Leaven community look like? I don't know. Do you? Can you see it? Right now, the goals that are related to those gaps simply say to strengthen salt and light, Leaven, children and youth organizing and infrastructure. But the overall goal, in my words, based on my journey with you all over these past many months, is that you as a community own yourself. That you own yourself. That you own your history, your practices, and your Leaven identity. That you take responsibility for your relationships and your resources. That you actively nurture your mission and culture and community because, as Derek Fenwick said this summer and others echoed on Friday night, this community is worth fighting for. And so you remember that big blank space between the gaps and the goals? It's a giant canvas. No one can paint the picture within this frame for you. It's yours to create together. What do you see on this canvas? Can you see anything? To support this creative process, this little ad hoc strategy team that I've pulled together is envisioning and is beginning to invite leaders into currently existing teams and cohorts who will work and create alongside some new teams and cohorts, each tending to different gaps, each learning or learning again or learning anew the practices that this community already has, each bringing their own creativity and passion and wisdom. All this so that you can confidently partner with staff, not be led by staff, but partner with staff to own this community for yourselves. Because this community is worth fighting for. Because community matters. Can you see it? Friends, that was a lot, and thank you for the honor of being able to share that with you today. LaVeta is going to invite us into not just one-to-ones, but small groups of 3 and 4s. And I invite you to reflect deeply. How does this community matter to you? How do you respond to what I've shared, the gaps and the emerging energy? How do you respond to the invitation to own yourself as a community?